People don't realize how big of a fight when I say how much of a win these charges are, because this has been such an extreme fight to get to this point.
Nearly 1 year after 19-year-old Dylan Rounds went missing from his Utah farm, charges are filed in his murder. His parents now speaking out, saying the charges are long overdue.
It's about time. It is about time. To know how long they've had what they have infuriates us even more.
Last week, 59-year-old James Brenner was charged with 1 count of aggravated murder and 1 count of abuse or desecration of a human body. The charges come months after Brenner was named a person of interest in Rounds' case.
He crossed paths with a really bad, horrible guy that just is, I don't know what I can say other than it's unfortunate.
According to a probable cause affidavit, investigators recovered a video from Rounds' phone that led to Brenner's arrest. Court documents read in part, quote, "The video showed the defendant with bloodstains on his arms and shirt as he was cleaning a gun. The shirt, which defendant is wearing in the video, was analyzed and the victim's DNA was found on the shirt." Rounds' father, Justin Rounds, says news of the video was bittersweet.
Felt good to at least finally have charges pressed on him, and then to find out. Didn't feel good to find out about the video, but it did. About the video of him cleaning the blood off of the gun in his hands. I don't know how it felt. I can't really describe it. Well, I wasn't happy.
The 19-year-old was last heard from in May of last year.
It was on May 28th, which was Saturday, that he called his grandma and said he had to get his truck in the shed.
Rounds' mother, Candice Cooley, says her son called his grandmother to talk about some farming plans for the day. After that, he never made another call.
And the reason it had to go in the shed is because he still had some triticale seed in it, and his tarps had some holes. So if he didn't put it in the shed, then the rain gets into the seed sprouts, and it's no good. You lose your. So that's why it had to get in the shed. From there, he said he'd call her back. He reached out, he called Brenner about, I can't remember the exact time, but we know he was at the gate to get onto the property. And then that was it. He was never heard from again.
At the time of his disappearance, Rounds was working on his farm in Lucin, Utah, near the borders of Idaho and Nevada. His parents tell us he often traveled for work.
Dylan chased his work. He had his stationary homes with me and his father, but he chased his work, just like so many custom people do. I mean, there's custom crews all over this area for farming. There's people who come clear from Kansas to cut grain in Idaho. It is such a common thing that people don't realize. It happens all the time.
Though he owned property in Lucin, Rounds did not live there.
Dylan absolutely did not live in Lucin. He had a camp trailer there that he would stay in if he was planting, or he had his pivot on and needed to watch the water, so he had a place to sleep. He didn't live there. He would be back and forth. He'd stay more in eastern Idaho.
Both Rounds' parents tell Law&Crime Network he was a dedicated farmer who dreamed of working since he was a child.
Dylan from the time he could toddle around with his dad and his grandpa, that was just it. We knew, he was going to be a farmer, and that's what he was going to do.
I mean, his hobbies were farming. It sounds kind of odd. It is kind of odd a little bit, but that's what he liked. Since he was little, that's all he ever wanted to do.
So when he turned 16 and got to go do that stuff, it was better than getting his driver's license. Just to be able to go work on a farm. He was just a worker. He was just a good-hearted worker. That's all he, ever wanted.
Neither parent felt unsafe with Rounds working in Lucin, saying he was more than competent to run a farm on his own.
Dylan was 19 years old, 10 months. So all that Dylan did, he wasn't just some little 19-year-old kid. Dylan was pretty go-getter, and hard work didn't bother him. And people might think we just say that because it's their son. It was the absolute truth.
Strong-headed, strong-willed. He had his goals. He had his plans. Ever since he was a kid, it was all about tractors and farming.
Cooley says she last saw her son on May 23rd, the Monday before he was last seen.
Typical Dylan, blowing the house. I'm finishing Independence Valley. I'm going to go get my stuff and head to Lucin and plant. Just Nothing, just typical Dylan. Just don't know he's coming, pulls in the driveway fast, jumps out of his pickup. Guess what, Mom? You'll never guess what. That was always had a story. Everything had to have, he wasn't going to call you just to see how you were doing. It always had to have a story. Like, guess what? That's how the conversation, you'll never guess what happened. You'll never guess what I seen. That was just him.
But days later, she received a concerning call.
It was Monday that Dylan's best friend called me and said, have you heard from Dylan? And I said, well, no, I talked to him on Thursday. And he says, well, kind of told me Karen said I talked to him this day. And so I called him, and I'd called and texted him a couple times and didn't hear anything back over that weekend, which was nothing out of the usual. I knew he was planting. It was nothing for Dylan to break a phone, not have a charger, nothing out of the ordinary, until myself, his father, grandma, grandpa, friends, everybody kind of started talking, and nobody had heard from him. And that was not normal. So that's when we all headed to Lucin to go see what was going on.
After the call, both Cooley and Rounds went to their son's property in Lucin.
I called in a missing persons report in Park Valley, which is about 50 miles from Dylan's farm, because I just knew something was wrong.
At first, Rounds says he thought there may have been an accident.
I started to think maybe there was a farming accident or something. Maybe a tractor was stuck, or maybe he broke down because it's such a big area. His phone was dead. Maybe he was somewhere there.
But when they recovered Dylan's boots, both parents say they knew something was wrong.
Because he wouldn't have left his boots there. They weren't old. They weren't bad. Old and worn out for Dylan would be basically his toe sticking through a hole. There would have been no reason for those boots to have been in my mind at all.
But it's when we found the boots. When we found the boots, there is no other explanation for them to be out there besides Brenner put them out there. And the only way you would get Dylan's boots off of him is if he was not alive to keep you from doing it. And that's when we knew.
Cooley says officials with the Box Elder County Sheriff's Office were on scene when the boots were recovered. Looking back, she says the early stages of the investigation were, quote, terrible.
I truly believe laziness, just shrugging it off. This 19-year-old kid got sick of farming and walking away. He just walked away. They wouldn't listen to us. Truly, I don't know what could go through their head to make them do what they've done.
It's really frustrating. I couldn't figure out why they didn't take it more serious than they were. I just couldn't understand it.
Cooley tells Law&Crime Network the Box Elder County Sheriff's Office didn't take her son's case seriously.
They just acted like it was normal. The Sheriff's Department, like in those first days, and we'll stand by it, they mocked us. They laughed at us. They lied to us. They've told us, they tell us, well, it takes us 2.5 hours to drive out here. So you're telling us our son's not worth 2.5 hours? You signed up to protect and serve this county, and this is part of this county. I don't care if it's a 5-hour drive. This is what you signed up for.
Rounds has several theories for why the case was handled the way it was, but still can't fully understand.
It was a holiday weekend, and I think that they kind of thought, well, maybe he's out partying with friends or doing something. They didn't know who he was, really what he was about. He wasn't about that. So maybe for a few days, that's what they were thinking. Why it took so long for charges and stuff, I don't know.
Early on, both of Rounds' parents suspected James Brenner may have been involved in their son's disappearance.
So then when we got up there, Brenner was telling myself and my husband about how, Dylan couldn't fight his way out of anything. He shouldn't have even had a gun. He didn't know how to use it. All he could do was throw it at somebody.
At the time he went missing, Brenner was squatting in a trailer kept on the property where Rounds kept his grain truck. Cooley theorizes that her son made Brenner mad and led him to, quote, snap.
Dylan made him mad because he didn't answer his phone, so Dylan still took the gate down, even though it wasn't his property. And he had this wild horse that he'd tamed that he always wanted to keep in, and Dylan probably left the gate down, and that just made him mad, pissed him off that morning, and that's what he did.
Justin Rounds agrees, saying a motive may stem from a buildup over time.
He had nothing to gain from it whatsoever. I think, like Candice says, a snap moment. I think he had a temper, and I think that maybe there was some jealousy, and maybe Dylan. I mean, he probably has said, probably, I'm just guessing, I don't know, but he probably had a little bit of contention with Dylan, and Dylan's not the type to just put his head down and back down. He probably said something to him, maybe even weeks before, and it just kind of got under Jim's skin, and then the snap moment happened. I don't know.
Rounds tells Law&Crime Network he was introduced to Brenner years prior.
A couple of years ago, I introduced myself to Brenner. He was at my grandpa's house. My son had bought a bunch of pigs, and across the road from my grandpa's house was a vet clinic, and Jim Brenner was there. I was pretty upset that they bought the pigs and brought them to that property, and I was pretty upset when I left. And Dylan texted me and says, Jim Brenner's going to shoot you, and he's going to do, he doesn't like to be talked to like that. I said, well, then I'll have to come talk to him. And I came back to talk to him at the farm, and he was with my dad. My dad was calming me down, and it kind of just blew over.
He says Brenner had negatively spoken about his son in the past.
Jim was talking to a kid that works for me. I was watching him on the cameras. He was telling the kid what a spoiled kid Dylan was. I doesn't treat anything very good. You could just see a lot of jealousy in him. And I called Dylan and I said, Jim Brenner isn't your friend. He's sitting there talking about you. And he said, Jim's just kind of an ass. You could tell when we got to the shed that there was jealousy of Dylan. He was talking about how Dylan was bragging about how much money he had.
Cooley says Brenner was named a suspect in the case in July, but was not charged in her son's murder until 10 months after he went missing. That's when she learned about the video showing Brenner cleaning off a gun.
The cold-bloodedness part of it. I'm going to go in and clean myself up. I've taken his cell phone already. Just the thoughts of, well, now I'm going to take his boots, like almost stripping my son of his pride. And then standing face to face with us for days on end and never blinking an eye, never having a nervous tick, never acting uncomfortable, nothing.
After Rounds' disappearance, multiple searches of his Lucin property were made.
It was so gut-wrenching, and we were so lost, and we didn't know what to do, and we didn't know where to search.
Both Cooley and Rounds believe they may soon find their son's body, likely after the snow thaws.
Like I said, last summer we were out there, we were disorganized, we didn't know what we were doing, we were just desperately looking for our son. This year when we head out there, we've got some really specialized teams that are going to come out and help. We've got some elite ex-military guys that are going to come out. It's going to be organized.
Yeah, I'm confident we'll find his body. It might take a little bit, but you got to put positive vibes out there.
Rounds visited his son's property this week. He says it's a way to connect with his son. At the same time, he's still coming to terms with the loss.
Went out and looked at his farm, and just, it's a horrible place to get away to. And I just wanted to get away and just kind of, it's real peaceful out there. There was nobody out there, no noise, no nothing. I don't know, kind of connect with him a little bit. I don't even know if I fully grasped what's happened sometimes. Yesterday hit me pretty hard coming back from Lucin.
Law&Crime Network reached out to the Box Elder County Sheriff's Office for a comment for this story, but have not yet heard back. James Brenner is due back in court on April 24th to be arraigned. Reporting for Law&Crime Network, I'm Gillespie.